sometimes a piece of news just completely cuts through everything else. And this week, for me, it was the announcement that India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan.
Yeah, that definitely stopped me too. A 65-year-old treaty that survived actual wars and, well, constant tension.
Exactly. It's pretty huge. So in this deep dive, that's what we're tackling this really unprecedented move.
We've got some news reports, initial analyses trying to make sense of it.
Right. And our mission really is to try and understand, okay, what are the immediate reasons given for this? What could the fallout be, for both India and Pakistan? And how's the rest of the world reacting?
Yeah, we want to get beyond just the headlines, try and piece together what's really going on, unpack the trigger, the history, the potential consequences.
Okay, so let's start with the spark. The reports are pretty clear, aren't they? They link this directly to that awful terrorist attack in Pahalgam.
Tragically, yes. 26 lives lost. And India has very publicly attributed that attack to militants operating from Pakistan.
And it wasn't just talk. India actually sent a formal letter, didn't they? The Secretary of the Ministry of Jal Shakti.
That's right. Sent it straight to her counterpart in Pakistan, officially putting the treaty, well, on hold.
And the language in that letter, it didn't pull any punches. It mentioned, and I think this is a direct quote, sustained cross-border terrorism by Pakistan targeting the Indian Union territory of Jammu and Kashmir.
Yes, and they also mentioned Pakistan's refusal to negotiate as another key factor for this suspension.
Which, as one source pointed out, makes this the first time ever that one of the signatories has actually done this, suspended the treaty.
It's a really critical point. The IWT has been, well, remarkably durable. For India to take this step now, it says a lot about how seriously they view the current situation.
Maybe we should quickly just remind ourselves what the Indus Waters Treaty actually is, for anyone needing a refresher, its core function.
Good idea. So it was signed way back in 1960. The World Bank was heavily involved. Think of it as a water-sharing rule book for the Indus Basin.
Right.
It basically split the rivers. The three eastern ones, Sutlej, Beas, Ravi, they went to India for their unrestricted use.
Okay.
And the three western rivers, the big ones, Indus, Jhelum, Chenab, were allocated to Pakistan. And as our sources really stress, Pakistan is hugely reliant on those western rivers, especially for agriculture.
Got it. So back to India's justification. Terrorism, lack of talks. Was there more to their official reasoning?
Well, the core message really hinges on that the persistence of what India calls cross-border terrorism, creating an environment where, from their perspective, upholding the treaty just wasn't sustainable anymore. And the mention of negotiation failures suggests a breakdown, probably on water management talks specifically.
And Pakistan's response, I imagine they didn't take this lightly.
Not at all. They strongly condemned it. Their National Security Committee, the NSC, met and put out a statement.
Okay, what did they say?
They stressed that the IWT is a binding international agreement brokered by the World Bank, and importantly, it has no provision in it for one side to just unilaterally suspend or withdraw.
I saw one report quoted the NSC saying any unilateral change would be seen as an act of aggression. That's strong.
Very strong. It shows how vital they see this treaty and their view that India's move breaks international law. They also signaled they might hold all bilateral agreements with India in abeyance.
Including the Shimla Agreement.
Yes, that was specifically mentioned.
Wow. Okay, the Shimla Agreement. That's the bedrock, isn't it? The framework for them talking directly, avoiding third parties.
Pretty much. Signed in 72, it prioritizes bilateral solutions.
Yeah.
So Pakistan threatening to suspend that, well, it could potentially throw the door wide open for international mediation on issues like Kashmir.
Something India has always pushed against.
Exactly. One analysis we looked at even suggested Pakistan might see this Shimla strike as maybe more impactful against India than an immediate water strike.
That's interesting. How so?
Well, the argument goes that if Shimla's off the table, the line of control in Kashmir might revert to being seen as just a ceasefire line, which, according to this view, could maybe encourage separatist movements.
And it brings international focus back onto Kashmir in a way India doesn't want.
Precisely. Without Shimla's emphasis on keeping it bilateral, the path to international mediation looks clearer. It potentially internationalizes the whole dispute, changing the dynamic significantly.
It really shows how interconnected everything is. You pull one thread,
and the whole tapestry can start to unravel. It has potentially massive ramifications.
Now, this isn't the first time the IWT has been a point of friction, is it? There's some history here.
No, definitely not the first time. While suspension is new, disagreements aren't. Think back to the Salal Dam, India, built in the 70s. Pakistan complained to the World Bank.
And India had to make changes, right?
Yes, design modifications were made. Then you have the Kashanga and Rattle Dam projects more recently. Pakistan raised objections there too. Kashanga even went to arbitration.
And sources mention India has sort of threatened this before, after major attacks.
That's true. After the 2001 Parliament attack, and again after the 2019 Pulwama attack, the idea of using the IWT as leverage, maybe even suspending it, was floated in India.
So while actually doing it is new, the idea isn't entirely out of the blue. It fits a pattern, perhaps.
You could argue that, yes, it shows the treaty, despite its age, is always there as a sensitive point, tied up with the wider security situation.
Let's talk about that phrase India used, holding the treaty in abeyance. What does that actually mean in practice, legally speaking?
Yeah, in abeyance is key. It means temporary suspension. It's not termination.
Okay.
So it kind of leaves the door open for it to be reactivated later. But crucially, it creates this period of major uncertainty and gives India leverage without perhaps immediately triggering the consequences of a full final withdrawal.
Right, that makes sense. So with the treaty in the suspended state, what's the real world effect on water flowing to Pakistan? Can India just turn off the Indus?
Well, according to some Indian experts we saw cited, like Abhishek Dey from India Today, the immediate ability to drastically cut water flow might be limited.
Why is that? Infrastructure.
Exactly. India apparently doesn't have the massive dams and diversion canals in place right now to completely stop or reroute huge amounts of water from the western rivers.
So what kind of reduction are we talking, potentially?
The estimate mentioned was maybe in the range of 5 to 10% in the short term.
Which sounds small, but given Pakistan's reliance.
Correct. Even 5–10% could still have, noticeable impacts on agriculture, especially in certain areas or seasons. So it's not nothing, even if it isn't a complete cutoff.
So the idea of an immediate catastrophic water weapons scenario might be overstated for now.
Based on that analysis, yes. Building the kind of infrastructure needed for a major diversion would take years, probably decades, and cost a fortune. But the threat is there, and the long-term possibility definitely exists if India chose that path.
Understood. So the immediate impact might be less about a physical water shortage and more about the uncertainty and the political signal.
That seems to be a significant part of it, yes. Plus, even a smaller percentage cut could cause real problems. And the uncertainty itself is destabilizing.
Okay, let's go back to Pakistan's threat about suspending other agreements, especially Shimla. Beyond opening up Kashmir to mediation, what else could that mean?
Well, pulling back from Shimla basically tears up the main rulebook they have for managing disputes bilaterally. It could just halt progress on any dialogue, trade, border issues, diplomacy.
Making future de-escalation much harder.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
It could empower harder lines on both sides. And the source discussing this also brought up past Indian actions.
Like what?
Like the occupation of the Siachen glacier heights back in the 80s, or more recently, the abrogation of Articles 370 and 35A, which changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir. The argument is that Pakistan might view these as prior breaches of the Shimla spirit by India.
So it adds another layer of complexity, suggesting Pakistan might feel Shimla has already been undermined.
It paints a picture where the foundations were already seen as shaky, perhaps.
Right. And how's the wider world taking all this? The international community?
Predictably, with a lot of concern. Suspending a treaty that's been a pillar of sorts for over 6 decades, that gets attention.
Any specific reactions?
The United Nations, as our sources noted, has called for restraint from both sides. They're urging dialogue to find a peaceful way forward.
Understandable, given the stakes.
Absolutely. Everyone's aware these are 2 nuclear-armed states. Any escalation, especially over something as fundamental as water, is obviously viewed with extreme seriousness. That underlying nuclear context, it just hangs over everything.
It really does. It feels like a genuinely critical moment. India's move is, as we've said, unprecedented. Pakistan's reaction is forceful. The potential impacts are huge.
They really are. This decision by India breaks from decades of practice, even during really bad times. It signals just how deep the current crisis in the relationship might be.
And even if the immediate water cutoff isn't massive, the longer-term questions about water diplomacy, about resource sharing in that region, they're profound.
Completely. It forces you to ask, if a treaty this old, this established, brokered by the World Bank, can be suspended like this, What does that mean for the future?
Yeah, what kind of mechanisms can actually work to prevent these kinds of disputes over vital resources from escalating, especially when tensions are already so high?
It's a really sobering question. How do you manage shared resources peacefully when the political relationship is so fraught? There are no easy answers.
Definitely something for all of us to think about long after this deep dive ends.